Welcome to our PhD Writing webinar series, Part 1, The Principle of Cohesion, for the autumn semester of 2021. The topic of today's webinar is the principle of cohesion. But what is cohesion? Well, I've chosen a picture of a chain to help illustrate the idea. Cohesion is really about forming a united whole, just like the links of a chain. Each link serves to help build a unified whole. Separately, each link serves no real purpose, but when they're connected together, they form a unified chain that we can actually use for many things. The chain is also a symbolic representation of a couple of ideas useful for writing if we look into its actual meaning regarding cohesion. Cohesion can be understood as the action or fact of forming a united whole, similar to forming a chain through individual links. But also, we can take a definition from physics, which is quite useful for us as scientific writers, in which cohesion is the sticking together of particles of the same substance. And this is very valuable for us as writers in how we are going to create a unified whole piece of writing. But additionally, it's important that we look at another idea that is similar but different to cohesion, and that is adhesion. Adhesion is similar to cohesion, but it's in that we use dissimilar substances to make things stick together. This is also a valuable principle for us to use as writers because we are going to need to use both cohesion and adhesion for any type of scientific writing and publication that we are trying to do. So think about it this way. Cohesion helps to unify our writing, and adhesion helps us to create a purposeful flow and connection between different parts of our writing. In viewed another way, we can look at it like this. Here we see molecules of water cohering together. So in this way, we want similar ideas or similar structures of writing to stick together, whereas adhesion is dissimilar ideas connecting to each other, as represented through how water tension holds droplets of water together in a form of cohesion, but these water droplets adhere to a blade of grass. Okay, well that's all well and good, but what do these ideas of cohesion and adhesion actually mean for our writing? Well, we're already used to seeing cohesion and adhesion as central pieces of what we read in scientific and academic work, but we generally don't consider the terms cohesion and adhesion because we're so used to seeing how writing is formed through the IMRAD structure. If we take a look at how most scientific writing is formed, we typically find that the IMRAD structure or some variation of it is being applied. Here we can actually see that across a research manuscript, or maybe a cuppa or a monograph, we need to be able to have a cohesive and unifying focus and purpose throughout the entire document. The purpose of each IMRAD component is also useful to understand as separate sections of cohesion that build towards this unified purpose of what the paper should be throughout. So each section of our writing has a specific cohesive purpose that is actually separate from the next section. So it's important that in our writing, we also apply principles of adhesion to glue these different sections together to create one unified document. So again, cohesion is really valuable if we think about it as how we control the purpose and the information that is contained in a piece of writing. And pieces of writing might be an entire manuscript, a cuppa or a monograph, a chapter, a section of a larger piece of writing, or a subsection of a section, even all the way down to a single paragraph. Every paragraph can be thought of as a piece of writing that needs to be cohesive. Adhesion, however, can be seen as a principle that glues together these different pieces of writing to form meaningful connections. Or we could think of adhesion as being the transitions that we use from paragraph to paragraph, or the transitions that we make from section to section. Okay, so you still might be wondering, what does all of this actually mean in practice? How do I apply cohesion and adhesion in my own writing? Well, consider the following example. I went biking this weekend, and the water was so cool and refreshing, but I was really hungry after 2 days. I don't think I'll eat mushroom risotto again anytime soon. Huh? What? How are any of those ideas connected? Well, this is a perfect example of using only adhesion and sticking together random bits of information together. For me, I understand the cohesive nature of what I just explained to you because I experienced it. But I didn't present you with enough cohesive ideas to bind these different bits of information together. So you can't understand what I am trying to say because you don't know what the unifying topic is between these 4 different ideas of biking, water, hunger, and not eating mushroom risotto. You don't have enough cohesive information to understand what these bits of information have in common. And this is actually quite common in a lot of scientific writing that is difficult to understand. It typically occurs not because the ideas are not good, but because the ideas are not presented cohesively. And this could be caused from what is known as the curse of knowledge, in which we have a lot of information as writers, and we assume that our audience has the same information that we have and will therefore be able to make all of these necessary connections, even when we do not provide them with any connections in our own writing. The other cause of incohesive writing can actually occur because we don't know what our own unifying topic is, and it limits our ability to produce meaningful writing that makes sense to anyone other than us. So let's try this again, but more cohesively this time. I went mountain biking for 2 days over the weekend. On the first day, I biked to a lake and the water was so cool and refreshing that I had to go swimming at the end of the bike ride. The second day of biking was much harder, and by the end of that day of bike touring, I was so hungry because I had eaten most of my food the day before. So when I arrived home, I cooked and ate a whole pot of mushroom risotto for dinner on Sunday. But I ate so much that I actually made myself sick. I don't think I'll eat mushroom risotto again anytime soon. And now suddenly it all makes sense. Partly it's because I provided you with more detail that helps to fill in the gaps between those bits of information, but also because there was a controlling and unifying topic that I was biking for 2 days and became stupidly hungry. So the point of cohesion is not to write for yourself, but to write for your audience and give them ideas presented in a cohesive manner. So how much detail is needed? And how much detail is too much? How much do you think that the audience needs to know versus how much do you think they already know? There's no clear answer to these questions, and in reality, it's not really about the details. It's about how well unified, how well connected, and how well explained the ideas are within each sentence that build up your paragraph. So, in order for us to have cohesive writing, at the center of every paragraph, we need to have a controlling topic. And this controlling topic is going to help to connect the ideas that we present, the examples that we use, the evidence that we provide, as well as any explanations that we give around that topic. Now, starting at a paragraph is a good place, but we also need to recognize that the controlling topic appears when we look at the structure of our entire written document as well. From the point of a paper, down to sections, down to paragraphs, even down to our sentences, we need to make sure that we have a clear and logical flow of ideas and information that are controlled by a controlling topic. And an easy starting point to understand how we can control our topics is to realize that the same way that papers, sections, paragraphs, and sentences move, we need to start first providing our reader with general information, and as every segment or piece of writing progresses, we move towards newer and more specific information. The controlling idea for a manuscript that is going to be published in a journal typically comes from things like our research questions or our hypothesis when we are actually constructing our outline. So it's important for us to begin thinking about central topics and controlling ideas even in the outlining stage before we start publishing. Because if you have a manuscript that has too many topics or themes, you're likely going to face rejection when you try to submit it for review because you don't have a central controlled topic or focus. So being able to start from this standpoint is very vital for us to actually improve the cohesiveness, not just of our paragraphs, but of the writing that we do as a whole. So let's return to this idea of the IMRAD structure. And again, there may be variations depending on what it is that you are writing and where it is that you are planning to publish. So recognize that the IMRAD structure is flexible and can be changed. But when we really look at what the IMRAD structure presents us with, we start with very general information. Typically, our title has a generalized bit of information to draw people in. Our introductions need to start out generally, but we move further down to more and more specific information as each section progresses. And on top of that, we can think about the purpose of each section again, starting out rather generally. What is the context of the project? How does it fit with other research on the topic in the field? And what is the research question or hypothesis that you're actually researching? We can see how this idea of general information to specific information moves through our introduction. We can also see how it's going to move through our method sections, our results, all the way down to our discussion and our conclusion. And then, of course, the most specific information that people will be able to find about how you conducted your research will be contained in your references. So when we break all of this down, we can clearly see that each section is also applying this general information to specific information flow of ideas. We're already controlling how we are introducing information to our readers. This flips, of course, once we come down to our discussion and move into our conclusion, because by our discussion, we should have the specific findings and our specific interpretation and discussion of those findings, and we broaden out in the conclusion to generalize those findings and make them applicable to the wider field. But of course, because each of these act as cohesive sections on their own, we also need to be aware about how we're going to adhere them through summaries and transitions. How is it that we are going to conclude each section and lead the reader in a meaningful and purposeful way towards the new information that is going to be the centralized focus or the controlling topic of the next section? If we're able to do this by following this principle of general information towards specific information, we can create the links of the chain that create a cohesive document as a whole, and we can use adhesion across sections to glue the paper together. What is really important here is that we are trying to control the flow of information by applying the general to specific principle and cohesion and adhesion. So we're going to replace the general to specific flow with this visualization here. We can think of each section of writing that we are going to do in a manuscript as being represented by one of these funnels, moving from general information, nice and broad at the top, to specific information, narrowing down at the bottom, before it feeds into the same structure again and again. And you can see by the discussion and conclusion, we flip the cycle here. And I think that this funnel visualization is very powerful for us because it helps us to understand how we not only structure across an entire document, but that we recognize that entire documents are made up of individual sentences that form paragraphs. And all of these, both sentences and paragraphs, as well as sections across our entire manuscript, are going to follow this general to specific information flow. Our paragraphs that are contained within a structure are going to be built in the same sort of way. And we want to make sure then that each paragraph that we write is going to be cohesive and that we find a transition that allows us to glue or adhere from one controlling topic in one paragraph to another controlling topic in another paragraph. And as each paragraph progresses, the information we present and the ideas we give our readers are going to become more and more specific, and newer ideas will become present. Paragraph cohesion is important because without individual paragraphs that are built cohesively, we cannot build a cohesive section. So we can apply a very simple principle to structure our paragraphs called the SEEC structure or the SEEC structure. This is a great way to act as a guideline for developing and presenting ideas at a paragraph level. And with the SEEC structure, what we're trying to do is start out by seeking each paragraph's topic. What is the central controlling idea of the paragraph that is going to unify the paragraph so that all other information presented is connected to and flows from that controlling idea? We next want to seek to expand understanding and give explanations, examples, and evidence to inform our reader. We want to be sure that the body sentences inside of a paragraph are not only well connected to the paragraph's topic, but act as explanatory sentences because they're going to build the bulk of what it is that we actually write inside our paragraph. This will be the facts, interpretations, connections, and ideas that we are trying to get across to our reader. And finally, we want to think about seeking the next paragraph's topic. This is where we begin applying the principle of adhesion. How are we going to glue two different paragraphs together with a smooth and purposeful transition? Which means that we always need to be thinking about the next big thing that is going to come. And how is it that we are going to flow from one paragraph to another in a way that allows our reader to have a firm understanding of the connection between two different ideas? The SEEC structure can be visualized and represented as follows. We see that the SEEC also applies the general to specific information flow of ideas, and that's because we want to start by stating the topic of the paragraph. The purpose of doing this is that the first sentence of every paragraph identifies the topic and controls the information that is going to be presented in this paragraph. Next, we want to be able to explain the topic's scope within the paragraph. The body sentences are useful to expand the reader's understanding. We also want to provide examples of the topic within the paragraph. Body sentences give examples and provide factual evidence related to the topic. And then we finally want to conclude and look for a meaningful way to transition to the next paragraph. This may involve summarizing the paragraph or creating a transition that flows towards a new topic and therefore a new idea. So you should always be asking yourself at the end of every paragraph, what comes next? What will be the logical new idea that is going to be presented? Inevitably, at this point, some of you are probably wondering, well, yeah, this is all great information and it's really helpful, but what I really want to know is how long do paragraphs need to be? So I'm going to nip this in the bud right now. Length doesn't matter. Cohesive and meaningful paragraphs do. Some paragraphs might be 4 to 5 sentences, others might need to be 10 to 12. What's important is that your paragraphs are controlled by one central theme to apply this principle of cohesion so that the information presented in the paragraph is well connected to the topic and controlled by that topic. Length doesn't matter. Make it as long or as short of a paragraph as you need to be able to have a clear and cohesive idea presented to your reader. Let's take a look at some practical examples from published literature to see how we can apply the SEEC structure at a paragraph level. In this case, we're going to keep up the SEEC and the general to specific flow of information present on the screen. It's not so important that you read the entire paragraph here. What is important is to understand how you can break apart what you are reading, whether it be other people's literature or your own writing while you are reviewing it. So first, when we apply the SEEC or SEEC structure, we want to search for what the topic of the paragraph is. And again, this should be present in the first sentence. Here I've highlighted it in blue, and I believe that the topic that we're looking at is tropical forest loss is a source of global environmental concern. At this point, we're just looking for key words that help to provide focus that will create a cohesive and unified paragraph. Next, we want to see where else this topic is presented within the paragraph. You may look for those same words or synonyms, similar words that have a similar meaning. In this case, I've found words like concern, forest, global forest, environmental, and even the word conservation, which is a practice against forest loss. So I believe that there is a firm cohesive connection and have highlighted that word. Now, as we see, the topic is appearing in every sentence throughout the paragraph. This is a good sign that this paragraph is cohesive. Next, let's look for some examples that help to expand our understanding of the topic. This is where we start to see new and more specific information being presented, things like an issue negotiated by a narrow sphere of actors, the welfare of forest-dependent communities, barriers to agreements, including sovereign rights of governments to determine priorities within their borders, or the proliferation of different related agreements across a range of environmental, social, and economic issues. You see that we are given much more specific information as explanations and examples that expand our understanding. And of course, we can also look for examples and evidence, which is highlighted here in yellow. We even begin right in the topic sentence with an example. We have dates, we have numbers, we have 16 million hectares per year, and then we have a citation. This is how you can construct examples and use evidence, which is what we're pretty used to doing as scientific and academic writers anyways. The information contained in parentheses is the evidence. It's clear that this author is citing other people, and we understand that we can also find that evidence within those papers. Finally, we want to move down to conclude and transition. So, what is being transitioned towards in this conclusion? Highlighted in purple, we would assume that the next paragraph is going to be about the result being a proliferation of different forest-related agreements, but that are largely without binding commitments or consensus as to their relative priority. It would be a bit of an illogical jump if the next paragraph of this article started talking about the importance of cutting fossil fuel emissions or about how governments in forested countries are, generally speaking, corrupt. That wouldn't make any sense. So this is, again, the principle of adhesion. We want to take a cohesive paragraph that's focusing on one central topic and connect it to a new idea by presenting it either in the last sentence of a paragraph or by forming that transition and connection in the first sentence of the next paragraph that is going to be read. Okay, super simple stuff, right? I think that paragraph was a great explanation and a wonderful example of both understandable writing and cohesive writing. And I would argue it's understandable because it's cohesive. It's up to you if you agree with me or not. But let's take a look at another example and see how incohesive writing can actually make understandability more difficult and therefore reading more challenging for us. Again, this is a real published article on the same topic but from different authors. Let's start out by looking at just the first sentence of the paragraph to see if we can find out what the topic is. I'll make it a little bit easier for you. This is a pretty heavy topic to start out with. I think that the topic of this paragraph is that the UNFCCC Conference of the Parties have further specified and agreed on policy and mechanisms for implementing REDD through long-term collaborative action. I would argue that we're off to a difficult start here. The topic isn't very clear or well connected or even well stated, and this is the first paragraph of the introduction of this published paper. Because the topic is so broken apart and there's a lot of specific information that's provided before we understand what the general topic even is, there's a good chance that this paragraph and probably the rest of this paper is going to be difficult to understand. Let's see if we can identify where else the topic is appearing in this paragraph. This is in stark comparison to the first example that I provided. We can see that the topic is hardly appearing at all across the entire paragraph. This is highly problematic because it means that we're not being given cohesive information that is connected and to and controlled by the topic sentence. Additionally, if we include this new concept, REDD+, which isn't really the topic and is really only mentioned twice, we notice that we further lose cohesion because now there's multiple topics, but they're not really thoroughly being discussed. So this example lacks a clearly stated topic in the first sentence, as well as that topic is not the central focus of what is being presented throughout. Additionally, I don't believe that we are seeing a general to specific flow of information either, making things very difficult. If we actually move down to read the last paragraph here, particular reference is made in the UNFCCC text to the need to involve local communities in implementation and measuring of carbon stocks, we would assume the next paragraph will be about how to include local communities in implementing and measuring carbon stocks, or different ways to involve them, or why that need to involve local communities is so important. But instead, if you read this article, that is not what the next paragraph is about. Instead, the next paragraph transitions to talking about contours of the agreement. But they don't say exactly what these contours are. They haven't formed any connection to the need to involve local communities. So the adhesion that is being presented is also illogical, making it further difficult to understand not only the connections made within a paragraph that is incohesive, but the connections between paragraphs because they're not well glued together. Remember, this is a real example of published research that you are probably going to end up facing having to read in your own discipline. If you find something like this difficult to understand, it's not that you are stupid or incapable of understanding it. It's that the author has chosen to try to sound very smart. And of course, when we read writing like this, it seems very impressive. It seems very intellectual, very intelligent. But let's be honest. Reading this type of work, let alone one paragraph, imagine trying to read multiple documents written in this style. You're probably going to get a headache and just get very frustrated. This last example is a good example of incohesive writing because it ignores the two basic principles of general to specific and applying cohesion and adhesion through the SEEC structure. So, when it comes to you and your writing, you need to ask yourself these two questions. Do you want to sound smart, or do you want to be understood? For me, my preference is clear. I want to be understood, but it's a personal choice that you can make for yourself. But if you agree with me and want your writing to be easily understood by readers the first time they read it, so that they can spend more time thinking about and applying your big ideas than trying to make sense of what it is you're trying to say, simply follow the principle of moving from general information to specific information as a way of forming links that build cohesion and apply the SEEC structure in your writing.